Raise your hands if you've ever considered a big change in your life, be it a new degree, a new career, a big move. Keep them up for a sec. Keep your hands up if you went through with that change. Wow, lots of people going through with it. That's awesome. Well, in a lot of rooms, many hands will go down in that scenario. And that's because change is incredibly scary. My name's Paul Vann. And just like many of you, I was a UVA student back here in 2023, sat in many of the same rooms as you guys, same classes, and towards the time of my graduation around 2023, got really interested in AI and security, and like many aspirational people, went to go create a startup. Over the 2 years after that, we raised funding from venture capital investors. We found some early design customers, design partners. We had the opportunity to speak on stages like this about what we're building. And then around late last year, I threw that all away. Well, it felt like that. Today, we're going to talk about the idea of a pivot, and not just the buzzword that you might hear on Twitter or LinkedIn, or if you take a visit to the Silicon Valley, but the gut-wrenching, terrifying moment where you decide that everything you've kind of done up to this point, you might throw away for something new. To start here, let's talk about why change is so scary. Many people think change is scary just because of fear of the unknown, fear of doing something new that you haven't done before. And that is, of course, true. But the fear of change is also due to a fear of waste. When you've spent 4 years on a degree or 2 years working very heavily on a certain startup or topic in the startup, or you've spent a decade in a career, it's incredibly hard to look back at all of that work that you've done and say, this chapter's over and it's time for something new. And psychologists actually have a term for this. They call this the sunk cost fallacy. We will continue digging deeper or digging a deeper hole because it's hard for us to justify that we've done all of that digging for nothing. And this fear is even louder in 2026 with the rise of AI. Right now, AI is completely reshaping markets, job markets, and the industry as a whole. There are jobs that were around 3 years ago that are no longer around today. There are jobs that are around today that were not around 2 years ago. And frankly, there's so much motion in the AI space right now that even the people working on it don't know how it's fully going to impact where people land and what the job market looks like in the future. So the truth is, change is scary. And one way that a lot of people respond to this oftentimes, when AI is moving like crazy or the ground's kind of moving out beneath us, is this idea of standing still, trying to say, hey, what I'm doing right now is stable, so I should stay where I am. But this is the wrong approach, because when the ground is moving super quickly beneath you, standing still is the worst thing that you can do. So let's talk about a few times where companies or people have made a change that it's worked out. The first one we'll talk about is Cursor. Now, if you're a software engineer in the room, you're probably familiar with Cursor. They're one of the bigger AI software engineering tools out today. And the funny thing about Cursor is when they first got started, they were building a tool for mechanical engineers. So different topic, similar, but definitely different. And they spent 6 months working on this product. They were building out the product, trying it out with people, trying to raise money, and just were not having any success whatsoever. And so they decided one day, well, this is not working out. What are we going to do now? And they looked at what they had and realized it might apply to software engineers. And so they started to build some use cases around it, started to build in kind of a software engineering side to it. And what ended up happening is they became a $27 billion, or actually maybe a little bit more than that now, one of the fastest growing startups in history. And so just from one small change, they went from what probably would have turned out to be nothing to one of the fastest growing startups of all time. Now, my favorite one or example is Slack. Slack is an internal messaging tool that I actually use actively, and many enterprises and startups and alike will use Slack. Slack started out as a gaming company. They started out building a video game. I think it was called Glitch. And they built it for a while, released it, pretty much had no interest in it. And they looked at this kind of failure and were like, well, what do we do now? Do we build another game? There wasn't really much to run with. Turns out they had built an internal messaging tool to work on the game together. And they said, we can try and turn this into a product. There's a lot of unique aspects here. And lo and behold, they are now one of the largest internal messaging tools that exists today. Now, that being said, let's jump into my story here at Validia. Back in 2023, I was just right about to graduate, and I went to go speak at the RSA conference, a large cybersecurity conference out in San Francisco. And I was speaking on ChatGPT and how adversaries were going to leverage it to stage more advanced attacks. So how hackers were going to use ChatGPT to make themselves better. And I actually remember someone in the crowd asked me a question. They said, well, what about like audio and video? What happens when those tools start being roped in? And I was like, that's a good idea. And so I started a startup on that called Validia. And we were doing deepfake detection, identity authentication, and phone calls and video calls, making sure the person that you're talking to is who they say they are. And over those 2 years that we worked on this, we had a really good run. We built out the full product, integrated it with Zoom, partnered up with Zoom, Microsoft Teams. We raised venture capital funding. We raised angel investments. We even had the chance to work with some Fortune 500 companies. But something just wasn't quite sticking for us. And that was really us trying to go and actually sell this at a large or high price point to enterprises. Our assumption when we started Validia was that deepfakes and this problem would continue to grow and grow and grow and become so big that people were concerned about it. And it did grow. It just didn't grow as quite as much as we anticipated it would. So while we did all of this work and all of the execution alongside what we did while we were building Validia went really well, the assumption, that core idea that we started with, just didn't come to fruition the way we thought it would. But at the same time, as we had these conversations with CISOs and cybersecurity teams and people building and working with AI, there was a big problem that they were facing. And that problem was the security of the AI that they were deploying. How do I know that the models that I put inside of my organization are secure? How do I know that the agents that are working on my customer data or my company data are secure? And so while we had this experience broadly in AI and security, we were focusing on this problem where there just wasn't quite a fire. And so we decided to make a pivot more broadly to AI security and securing modern-day agents and LLMs. And this was a very tough decision for me because, again, we had to pretty much throw away a year and a half's worth of product. We had to throw away a lot of the connections we had made, a lot of the things that we had done in that deepfake space. But it's one that I'm very excited about today, and I'll tell you a little bit why. But first, what are the things that I learned while making this pivot and making this change? The first thing is how do you know when it's time to make a change, be it in your career, be it a startup, whatever it may be? The thing that I learned is the signal for making a pivot or a change is not failure. In fact, I'd actually argue, like, if you fail, I would not say to necessarily make a change. You'll fail in everything and anything that you attempt. But again, failure is not the signal. The signal is when the core assumption that you built your business model on, your career on, whatever it may be, no longer stands true. And again, this is what happened with us at Validia. We realized that, while we executed the way we had wanted to and got everything built out that we had intended to, that people just weren't buying because the attacks weren't happening that we assumed would happen. And so when that core assumption no longer stands true, those are those moments where it might warrant making a significant change. The second thing is, what do you have left when you make a pivot or make this big change in your life or your career? Oftentimes when people make a big change or shift, they'll kind of blow up everything that was before it. They'll say, hey, I'm onto something new. This is my new life, my new startup, my new job. In reality, it's about finding the threads that you can pull from the thing that you changed from. And for us, there were two things. The first thread was our network. While we obviously weren't selling the deepfake product anymore, we had been selling to the same people, which was cybersecurity teams and AI teams. And we had this huge network to pull from, give us feedback on what we were working on, and effectively help us sell and get to market 10 times faster than it would have been had we not had that network there. The other thread we pulled on is we had significant experience in AI and security. And we had spent so much time in this space, and while it wasn't necessarily the exact same thing, pulling on a lot of that expertise, pulling on the people that we had worked with there, enabled us to get started very, very quickly. And the third thing is, what am I left with, when I do pivot? Like, what is the actual benefit for me? What do I get from this pivot? One of the things that I thought when I was making a change to Validia was that I was only really, shifting the success of the business, success of myself, and success of, the people, obviously, who were working with us. But I think there was another thing that I missed, which was my excitement about what we were working on. I think looking back after we made this change, I realized that for 6 or 7 or 8 months before we made this shift, I was starting to lose excitement in Validia and what we were working on. And I realized after we made this pivot, as hard as it was, as scary as it was to make this change, that I really had this renewed interest in what we were doing at Validia. And I think this was one of my just more insightful moments when making this changes. There was really, grass was greener on the other side, to say the least. Now, to close this out here, like I mentioned, I was a UVA student like you guys, and Some of you guys here today might have it all figured out right now. You might have your job lined up for after you graduate, know exactly what you're doing, and I applaud you guys for that because it's really hard to figure out. Some of you guys might not quite have any clue what you want to do after, and I also applaud you guys because there are so many awesome opportunities out there, and the world's kind of your oyster. And then there might also be people who thought they had figured it out and now are wondering, hey, is there something else that I want to be doing, or is this the right path I want to be going down? There might be this quiet voice kind of in the back of your head saying, hey, maybe this is the thing I should be doing. And I might be biased because obviously I've made a few changes in my own career, in my own life, but I'd like to say and encourage to listen to that quiet voice because it's really exciting when it is right. Some of the smartest people that I've met, whether it be executives, researchers, or just people that I've met all throughout my career, they never took the right path from the beginning. They never just kind of nailed it on the first try and didn't have any mistakes or pivots throughout the way. They oftentimes started in the wrong spot and figured out what the right path was as they went. And what I'd like to end with here is a pivot can oftentimes be interpreted as failure, as, we failed at this one thing and now we're going to go do something else. And I actually like to think that it's different than that. I'd like to say that a pivot is more like paying attention. I was talking to a venture capital friend of mine recently, and one of the things that he said that really stuck with me was so many startups spend so much time in spaces that are probably have been dead for a year or 2 years, but they're so afraid to make that change, and they're not really paying attention because they're so deep in it. And so I think that all of us can pay attention, figure out if we need to make a change, and I encourage all of you to make that change that you're hoping to make. Thank you guys for having me.